Hello and welcome to our Cybersecurity Check webinar. I'm happy that you are here. So let's get started. As you can see, this is our first webinar, also using a webcam. So hi everyone. My name is Jan Kemper. I'm a consultant and auditor, and I've been involved in the cybersecurity space for a couple of years now. And for this, a new product that we are launching or a new service that we are launching, I'm responsible. So I'm glad that you could find your time, and I will explain it to you and see, hopefully you can see what our motivations are and how we can help you, I think, and especially the last topic is the most important one. So let's see what the topics are for today. We obviously want to get started with a little bit of motivation, what we try to achieve, where we can help. Then we really want to see how we should do a cybersecurity check, or how we think we can do it and how we did it in the past. Then we take a look at an example where I can explain to you what would be the results, what would be the output of something like that, and then we think about what the output helps us to achieve concerning any next steps. And at the end, there's always time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, there should be a box, I think to your right, where you can put it any questions. I will answer them in the beginning of the Q&A, or if anything comes during the webinar, I'm also happy to answer between the different slides. Okay, so let's get started. Within the recent years and recent months, the cyber attacks that, and probably you are aware of these because you're already registered for this, so you're kind of in the cybersecurity space already. But I think in general, cyber attacks have increased, and the public view of cyber attacks that these are an obvious problem that needs to be addressed is also arisen in the past. So I will show you 3 examples that were quite impactful here in Germany, and one international example. So there's a German media group called Funke Mediengruppe, and they offer like daily newspapers and regular papers and stuff like that. And they were attacked, they were hacked, and I think it was a ransomware, which as a result, they were not able to produce a daily newspaper. So they had a very like some kind of emergency newspaper, which did not cover all the usual sections because basically they almost did it by hand, as far as I can tell, and they weren't able to go back to a normal working mode for a couple of days. So their newspaper was not published as expected. This was very recent. This was in December. Yeah, and this was quite a big cyber attack in Germany in the recent months. Also in Germany, there was an attack on a university hospital in Düsseldorf, where the hospital needed to close down basically and could not accept any patients There was actually the case of a patient being delivered there, and they had to say, no, sorry, we are not operational. We cannot work. Our IT is down, and please go to the next hospital. And during the 30-minute ambulance ride, the patient actually died, unfortunately. So because their IT was down, they actually could not help that patient. Obviously, we don't know what the results would have been, but that would be the worst case here, that actually people may died because of that ransomware attack. And then a more recent attack in Amsterdam, where the European Medicines Agency is located. Obviously, right now it's quite obvious what they are looking at and what they want to give guidance, and they want to release obviously some COVID-19 coronavirus vaccine, and for that every manufacturer had to put in the required documents, and these were actually being manipulated. I'm not quite sure why exactly that was the case, but at the end of the day, the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine that was being applied for release in December, they were hacked, and some of the documentation was copied and manipulated. So quite a serious attack as well. Obviously, if you can't deliver that vaccine in time, people could also die. So that's a attack with a huge potential scale, and the risks are quite obvious here. So with all the recent cyber attacks and our work in the cybersecurity space for the last couple of years, we are always trying to help our customers, and we think that we can help if we are able to help you with showing a little bit more transparency and clarity, to give you more clarity within your cybersecurity posture. We try to make you aware of any weaknesses, any risks that you have in your organization that maybe you are not aware of, or certain stakeholders are not aware of that weakness and that risk. And obviously, you always need to budget. You need to prioritize your efforts, and if we can help you achieve more transparency, for example, you can have better decision making. You can focus on the right topics, and at the end of the day, that hopefully helps your cybersecurity efforts. So that's basically why we launched the cybersecurity check, because we want to help you achieve a better cybersecurity overall. And it's not compliance driven, it's not driven by anything else. We want to just help you that you understand your cybersecurity situation better. And if you can do that, then that hopefully leads to a better cybersecurity posture overall. How we do that, that's what I will explain to you in the next chapter. Basically, there are 3 pillars that I want to talk about. The first pillar would be the assessment. So in order for us to help you, we first need to define the as-is state. So we want to go in, we want to talk with everyone, or obviously not everyone, but whoever we decide is useful and helpful. We want to talk with them. We want to see what is the state of cybersecurity currently, how we can, what are the gaps, what are the weaknesses, what is actually good. Just the current picture is really necessary to have an idea and to go from there. So this is not talking about roadmaps. We don't want to talk about what will happen in 2022. We want to visit, we want to show up, we want to talk, we want to see what is happening today. And that is really useful for us to get an idea about the environment and about the scope. And from that on out, we can then use that to determine the degree of maturity. So one key result would be that we can define like some kind of cybersecurity degree of maturity. So at the end of the day, and I will explain the various degrees on a later slide, we want to go out there and say, hey, for that domain, I think you're set up very well. For that domain, like security awareness, maybe you're actually lacking. You don't have good processes in place, stuff like that. So this would be then a maturity rating. And then the other result would obviously that we can point out what we saw, what is a actual weakness, what is a potential risk, and that is something while we are doing our assessment, we as auditors, and I think this is something maybe you know us as, we can really help you. We can drill down on certain topics, and we can identify these weaknesses on different levels, and then help you to point these out to the various stakeholders. So this is the core principles that are working here. We are doing an assessment, and this assessment will lead to two results. One is the degree, the cybersecurity maturity degree, and the other one would be some kind of overview, some kind of list maybe of certain weaknesses and risks. We always need to keep in mind, and this is something we learned in the past while we are doing this, that the degree of maturity is not actually leveling up, and then the weaknesses are going down. So if I have a high degree of maturity, that does not mean I don't have any weaknesses. You can have very good processes in place. You can be set up quite well, but one single system out there, which is using a Windows end of life 2018 version or something like that, that is a weakness. While maybe you have 2000 Windows systems that are patched and are running a modern version of Windows, but at the end of the day, this is not a high degree of maturity does not automatically result in less severe weaknesses or risks. So that's important to keep in mind, and I think this is something we or me personally also learned in the last year, that we really need to understand the impact here. Okay, now we know what kind of is what we are doing, what the results will be in the end, but how do we get there? First off, since this is not a full compliance mandatory audit, we need to define goals. What are the goals here? And maybe the goals are obvious for you right now. It's called a cybersecurity check, but what I experienced so far, it's not only about cybersecurity. It's about a little bit more. And this is really depending on the stakeholder that want to do this. And we could have somebody who's really interested in GDPR compliance, data protection, to find out if there are any wrongdoings, basically, any major weaknesses on that part. Or maybe you just acquired a couple of companies and you actually have no idea what they are doing, how they are doing, because there's no reporting set up. They don't have the corporate processes already. They are doing their own thing, and it's kind of a black box for you. But obviously, since you acquired them, maybe you are responsible for some of the damages at the end of the day. So maybe that is the focus of your cybersecurity check, that you actually are more interested about recently acquired companies. Also, there could be the question, hey, actually, while you're doing a cybersecurity check, can you please tell us who's actually good at using the cloud? Who's actually which tech know-how is out there that maybe other lines of businesses or other business units can leverage? We have no idea. We have no way of talking to each other. It would be really good that we don't invent the wheel a second time. So maybe that is something that would be a goal in the end. So it's really important to figure out what will be the primary goal, what will be secondary goals, and stuff like that. And this is very dependent on the stakeholders at the end of the day. So let's say we have something here. We know what we want. Then obviously it's a question about scoping. So basically the width and the depth. Who do we want to include? Are these LOBs? Are these business units? Are these subsidiaries? We need to figure out. We can't probably include everyone. We need to make a decision, and that would be then the scope. And obviously, we need to decide how deep we want to go. Is it a deep dive, or is it more of a high-level check? We just want to get a feeling for what's out there. We want to understand, have like a basic understanding, or maybe if you already have a basic reporting setup and you are quite confident that it's all right out there, but you really want a deep dive on business continuity or something like that, then it's also something we can define within the scoping phase. And if we now have the scope, we have the goals, then we really need to drill down. How do we want to check this? What kind of control framework are we using for our cybersecurity check? And you could always go with like an external control framework. You could go with a internal control framework, like your internal policies or guidelines. While if you're using something external, this could be from NIST, could be PCI, could be Center for Internet Security, could actually be Microsoft best practices. If you really want to make sure your Azure usage is fine and is following along the Microsoft best practices, everything can work here. You could also go for some kind of hybrid approach, which you could do. We tried that in the past. It's possible. It could be a little bit tricky. It's definitely something you need to think about before you want to do this. But at the end of the day, you take a look, what are your goals? What is your scope? And then actually, how can we measure that? How can we find out what's really good there, what's bad, what's the right control framework? And then you would see, okay, now we need to find out how can we measure that control framework that we selected, and what kind of risk types we want to address, basically. So at the end of the day, these are the 4 steps I think we need to do during like any ramp up period for the cybersecurity check. Really need to understand what are the goals, and then we go from there. Okay, now we want to really just drill down on cybersecurity, business continuity. Okay, we can do that. So everybody needs to be included that it does a lot of revenue maybe. And we really want to pick a framework that is specialized on business continuity. So at the end of the day, this will be a period of 2 to, depending how fast you are, 2 to 4 or 6 weeks maybe, where we really get everything together, make sure we are aligned. Obviously, we will bring our suggestions to the table, especially regarding a control framework and the risk model and the maturity model. But at the end of the day, you have your goals, you know the scope, your company the best, and you need to decide who will be in scope. So let's look at an example. Maybe I was talking too much in theory here. What would be an example? So if we would start, we would go and say, okay, our goals would be, let's focus on the cybersecurity, obviously, and then actually go with GDPR compliance as a secondary goal. We want to make sure that our top 10 lines of businesses, according to turnover, are included. And we basically just want to do a high-level check. We don't need like a super detailed overview, because basically right now we don't know nothing. So we need some initial feedback. We need to know how it looks outside. And the recent acquisition we did, we actually want to deep dive there, because that's really a complicated topic. We have no idea how they are doing, if they are basically doing fine, or if it's actually a major risk out there. So we define the scope, and then we decide on a control framework. Maybe let's go with the critical security controls by the Center of Internet Security. I will explain these on the next couple of slides. And for the maturity and risk model, I think we can go with a custom model, and maybe we exclude the loss of reputation, because that's really hard to measure, and maybe your company here is not really in the public. So maybe that's something we don't really need to look at. We could exclude it. So now we have basically a setup which we want to run, and then we could start. And I will explain you the security controls here in a second. Just keep in mind, these could be everything. We can go with ISO, we can go with NIST, we can use your own controls. It really depends on the goals. So for example here, if we want to do a high-level check, I think these are quite okay for that, because we will have a couple of domains, high-level controls, which are actually 3 different control sets or groups. So we have the basic controls, we have the foundational controls, we have the organizational control group, and then for every group we will have a couple of sub-controls, and these are also included in different implementation groups. So these are pretty basic. I mean, it's not reinventing the wheel. We would look at something, if we would use the critical security control, it's about hardware and software inventory. It's about vulnerability management. It's about the use of administrative privileges. It's about secure configuration for hardware and software. It's about basic monitoring, basic audit logging. Then we would go on. We see something, if we want to really dig down on business continuity, like I said before, we would definitely like to integrate the control 10 here, where we take a look at data recovery capabilities. We also would like probably then to make sure we don't get hit by ransomware. So our email protection should be up to date and stuff like that. So it's a basic control framework. Some of you are maybe using this already. So maybe you are quite familiar with this. Also, we would also include security awareness trainings, incident response management, and software development security. So this would be then something we would discuss. We could bring that to the table. And as I said before, there are also different levels, different implementation groups, where we can say, okay, hey, we want to do a high-level check, so let's just focus on the level 1 controls or implementation group 1 controls. Maybe if during the ramp up we take a look at these and we see, okay, how about this or that level 2 control that seems useful, we want to check for that. So we will kind of have a subset here between maybe 50 and 140 controls for the high level check. And then obviously where we want to go for the deep dive, we want to make sure we include everything, maybe actually put something on top that is not included in the sys controls, which is maybe supplier risk or something like that, processes related to vendors or suppliers. Maybe that's actually a focus, so we need to add that. We can either do that by ourselves, put in a couple of controls, or we then do a hybrid approach and grab something from PCI or from the NIST cybersecurity framework. So then we have our control set aligned, and now we are able to measure these controls against capability maturity model. And you may know this. There are classic capability maturity model for IT processes around out there. For cybersecurity, it's something is coming up along the lines, but it's very recent, quite identical, and depending on where you start, this could be a tough challenge for you. So you can customize a little bit to make sure there's some kind of small differences where you can point out what the maturity is at the end of the day. So we usually go with something between 0 and 5, where 0 would be something the process just does not exist. If you don't do penetration test, that would be a 0. If you do a process but only do it like once and that's it, so if you did a 1 penetration test within the last 5 years, it's probably better than doing no penetration test. But if it was 4 years ago, it really maybe doesn't help you today. So that would be something of a 1. And then we improve here. Maybe these are actually documented, and you do these a couple of times, but there's no really defined interval. There's no defined start time. There's no defined deadline. So we are looking at a 2, but at least you're not doing this only on request. Then we go up, and now we are starting to do this frequently in defined intervals, once a month, twice a month, stuff like that. Process documentation is still minimal or undocumented. And if we increase our maturity, then we will also have established documentation. And at the end of the day, you probably know this, we are looking at a process that is actually being monitored and is being improved if necessary. And if you compare this to the classic approach, you could argue definitely that between 2 and 3, documentation is already necessary for 3, or maybe it's actually already necessary for 2. It really depends a little bit on the framework you are using. How does the maturity model map to that framework? And for some of the frameworks, these are not really process oriented, so you need to take more of a look at the implementation level, how much of the implementation is actually being done. So this needs to be a rough guideline here. Obviously, at the end of the day, the auditor, the assessor, will also do a subjective assessment. So sometimes these will be between 2 and 3, and the assessor will need to make a judgment. So unfortunately, for these kind of things, it's sometimes a little bit hard to be 100% objective. We're obviously trying to do that, and that's why we need to sit down during the ramp-up phase and actually look at the risk model, at the capability maturity model that we want to employ, and go from there. So how would that look in the real world? We would basically start, as I said before, the ramp-up period could be 2 weeks, could be 6 weeks. We would then define the scope, and if we want to say we want to do 6, I said 10 high-level checks before. Here, actually, at the end, we only have 6 high-level checks, and we have a deep dive for the recent acquisition in the bottom. And then at the end of the day, we will have reporting. We can also talk about the reporting. Do we really want to go for reporting of the overall cybersecurity posture, or do we also do reportings on business level, LOB level? So we would have 7, let's say, presentations with the different business units, and then one overarching presentation where we would actually consolidate all of our findings and maturity models. So how does that look? If we want to take a look at the results, if we were using the sys controls, we then would have a maturity overview at the end of the day. And within that maturity overview, we could actually see what's being done well and what is not doing so well within that LOB or within that overall organization. So we could really identify what has a high maturity, what is good, but we can also identify areas with low maturity. In that case here, we would take a look at software security and penetration testing and vulnerability management. So here we know we probably need to do our homework better, and we need to address these to increase our maturity in these areas. We also, this is a graphic, but we also create various spreadsheets, so we are able then to compare the maturity scores across the domains within the full scope, within the different business units, and even between companies at the end of the day. So I think that really helps to put stuff into context and to maybe see where your organization is already excellent and where your organization is maybe lacking. So this would be the maturity overview, and then we would also obviously point out whatever kind of risks and weaknesses we identified. So in that case, just an example here, if we take a look on point 7, that would be more of a compliance problem, where maybe people are using G Suite, AWS, or Slack within their own accounts, so there's no corporate account, so they purchased that, and maybe then at the end of the day they are not running stuff within Europe. So that could be a GDPR problem if your company is processing PII data from people from Europe. So that would be a possible risk. Also, if we find out within the software development process there's nothing regarding secure coding or vulnerability management, that's obviously also quite the challenge, depending if the software is being used on the internet or if it's only an internal software, then maybe the risk is not that high. but nevertheless, these are things we would point out at the end of the day. Multi-factor is obviously something which you want to use in 2021. If you're not using that, one LOB or two LOBs, you really need to be consistent here. From my point of view, you can point that out, that maybe the implementation level of MFA is not there yet. Maybe you actually are doing this on 7 out of your 8 application, but if you're not using MFA on your VPN, for example, that could be a big risk. So now I told you what we did. We did an assessment. We used that assessment where we sit down together, where we define goals, we define the scope, we want to define how we want to test that. At the end of the day, then we tell you what the maturity is in the different domains for the different control groups. We tell you what kind of weaknesses and risks you have. And that is basically the cybersecurity check. Obviously, this is only the first step. You need to really know what you're working with to go for the next steps. And that's why, because in my opinion, the next steps will be dependent on the results. And so they are not, let's say, included within the cybersecurity check, but it's obviously something where we also can help. And it really depends on whatever the result is. The most obvious one is now you know about your weaknesses and you know about your risks. You need to address them. We can probably help you with most of these. It could be definitely that you don't have any policies. You just want to do a workshop how you can set up your CI/CD pipeline in a secure manner. So it's definitely something where we can help, where we can brainstorm with you, where we can set up a project plan. We're obviously here to help, but you are probably free to do this on your own. Then we can also take a look at the results. And if we say, hey, that's actually really useful, we want to make sure that for, let's say, penetration testing, we are actually hitting maturity level number 3. So we want to do this with a certain frequency. We want to do this once a year, and that will be our maturity goal. So, and this is something we could do for all the domains, and then basically set up an action plan, how we can hit these maturity goals. And maybe in the future, we are also measuring these again. So we do a retest once a year to see if you actually improved on the maturity, if you hit your goals. If we are talking about the overall cybersecurity strategy, the cybersecurity check is a great base basically for developing this if you don't have one already, or if you need to update your security strategy. This is very useful input, because this is real world input, input that you are actually need to work with at the end of the day. So I think it would be a great baseline to develop a cybersecurity strategy. And I think this is a really interesting topic, and but you need to really know where you start if you want to address this on a strategic level. So this is actually it. These were all the slides I prepared, where I tried to explain you the process. I think if you have any questions, feel free to send them in now. I will take a look and see what is coming in. But I think the main point here is we really I think we really can help you, but everybody needs to really think about it. There's no one size fits all. We need to go out there and identify what goals you have, what is the stuff you really care about, and then we can work with that. And then we can deliver value. We can go in and tell you the truth. And from there on, you have a better base to define the next steps, and you have transparency within your organization. Okay. What is the difference between a cybersecurity check and a normal gap analysis? Okay, that's a good question. So what I would think about a gap analysis, this is always done when we have a clear target picture. So if we want to go for PCI compliance, ISO compliance, we actually know what the controls are, and now we want to identify the gap. So that's definitely possible to do this within a cybersecurity check. But for me personally, I think within that cybersecurity check, we can't guarantee for completeness because we will have we don't have enough time to I think to really figure out the scope in detail. So sometimes if we will show up at a cluster and suddenly this cluster has actually 3 different companies in it, and so we have less time to really go over all the compliance requirement and can deliver a full list of gaps, because that's not the goal. We want to go with it's a high level check. We want to go with a maturity degree at the end of the day. So if your goal is only compliance against ISO, I think we just need to do a dedicated ISO gap analysis where the colleagues then can make sure the scope is actually covered, and we can have enough time to give you a good results and give a full list of gaps, because that's not the goal here. We can't give you a full list of gaps of all your weaknesses. No, these are high-level weaknesses we can identify in a high-level check. We would identify different things in a deep dive, but it depends on your goals. And sometimes a minor weakness is not really helping to identify the goal at the end of the day. So I think these are quite different, to be honest, the gap analysis and a cybersecurity check. It could, but I think a cybersecurity check can help with like having the first step towards a compliance against a certain control framework. But I would say it does not guarantee you full coverage of all the controls unless you define it. Okay. Are there any more questions? I don't think so. So if you have any questions still, just reach out. I will send these slides out tomorrow. Just reach out if you have any questions. I would like to point out the next webinar is on pen testing. It will be in English as well. You can sign up for free on the USD homepage under the CST Academy space. Our colleagues will show you what they developed in the past 2 or 3 years, and how they can help you have a smooth pen test, how they can make sure that stuff is synchronized and you don't test something that has already been tested, for example. So it's quite amazing actually to see what kind of tools they are using. And so if you're interested in the more technical side, take a look at that webinar. I will do for sure. And the next one is in German only. I don't know if any German-speaking people are in here. It will be the first glance at the ISO 27002. I think there was a draft published a couple of weeks ago, and our ISO experts are explaining you what changed, what will change maybe, and if there's something different in there. I heard there's quite a different structure, but I'm not an ISO expert, so tune in at the end of March. It's also for free. You can sign up there, but it's in German. Yeah, if you want to also have this in English, maybe write them an email, say you care, you want to also have that webinar in English. And if that's not enough, you can always follow us and stay up to date. I suggest you go for the newsletter where we'll announce every new webinar, new events, secure coding stuff, PCI expert trainings and stuff like that. Also check us out on the social media stuff, Twitter or LinkedIn, where we'll also post webinars like these if they are announced. So thank you for joining. Have a great day and hope to see you soon. Goodbye.